So it's been 6 months since I got my hands on the Rogue Ally, and I feel like that's a pretty decent amount of time to move past the honeymoon phase and figure out whether or not this is actually something that will stick around in my gaming catalogue of consoles. And you know how it is, new tech drops, it's shiny, it's hyped, and you're in love with it for at least a couple days, if not a week, or maybe a couple of weeks, and then it slowly migrates itself to a drawer or a shelf once the novelty wears off. I was half expecting that this would happen to the Ally, but spoiler alert, it did not. So let's jump back to when I first got the device and when I first unboxed the Rogue Ally. There is a video on the channel for those of you who are new to Tech2 where I did a 1 hour later review of this device. It's basically just my first impressions, so definitely check that out if you're interested. I'll leave it in the top left of the screen. But as for what I saw when I first got the device in my hands, I was fairly impressed. It is a very good design, and the choices they made for how they've mapped out the buttons and the ergonomics of the machine I think were really laid out quite well. But of course I was a bit cautious given it is a handheld machine, so it could easily be a case of where it's too flimsy and you drop it once and it breaks, or the buttons don't feel great. But I mean, it looked amazing, and it's safe to say that I can confirm that all the buttons are amazing too. The only thing that I would improve if I could would be the triggers, especially coming from the PS5, where the triggers of that DualShock controller are just absolutely phenomenal. So it was a bit of a, it's raised the standard a bit high, but for what this device is offering, the triggers are good enough. And as I was saying, it does have a great design. It has a very nice bright screen and solid build quality. And I have been burned before with a few devices in the past, so of course it did contribute to why I was a bit cautious about this gaming machine. But this handheld gaming PC, it was absolutely phenomenal. It wasn't too bulky, like I feel like the Lenovo Go is a bit too big for me, and in terms of its performance that it can deliver, it is very, very good bang for your buck, especially if you're coming from the Steam Deck, which I know has its own cult following. And I'm not saying the Steam Deck is bad, but it does have a bit of an issue with playing games that may be a bit too hardware intensive, whereas this doesn't have the issue as much. But then there is a big catch in the end, which I will go into later in the video. But for the most part, this game can run most of the things you can throw at it. The Ally, right out of the gate, you could tell that ASUS have taken the time to think about user experience and not just the specs, though we definitely get to those. But the ergonomics, as I said, the layout, the UI, both very well done. And I love the fact that they went with the Xbox controller style of design, where the analogs are not on the same horizontal line. I think that's probably the best way I can think of explaining it. But it was really well laid out, in my opinion at least. Of course, some people may prefer a DualShock design where both the analog sticks are in a line horizontally across the top or the bottom. But for me personally, I'm a big fan of how they have done this. And even the little things like the satisfying click of the buttons and the subtle curve of the grips make a massive difference. And once again, of course, this is my opinion, so don't go too aggressive in the comments. It would be appreciated, but definitely drop your thoughts down below if you do have the Rogue Ally as to what you think of the ergonomic design and in general your experiences with the machine. But of course, going back to the point of the video, first impressions don't mean too much if the device can't hang long term, which is definitely something I thought was going to be an issue. But here we are 6 months later, and I can confidently say the Ally didn't just meet my expectations, but it's kind of redefined how I game. So let's talk about performance, because honestly that's what sold me to get this machine over the Steam Deck. And I remember booting up Elden Ring for the first time just to see how ridiculous the idea was. A massive open world, graphically intensive game on a handheld machine, and I was fully prepared for it to chug, maybe drop frames left and right or overheat or something along the lines of that, and instead I got a surprisingly smooth, stable experience. I've since played The Witcher 3, Spider-Man Remastered and Gears of War Ultimate Edition, all on the Ally, and do I have to tweak the settings for some of these games? Yeah, sometimes, but I kind of like that part, and it does kind of give you that old PC gamer instincts. It definitely brings those out if you were into PC gaming ever. If not, it's definitely a fun learning experience messing with the settings to hit that performance sweet spot. And the Ally gives you those options between armory crate profiles, TDP adjustments, and resolution scaling. You've got real control here with this machine. When I want to conserve battery or I'm playing something less demanding, I can drop it to 15 watts or even 10 watts, and when I'm plugged in or docked, then I can absolutely let the machine do its thing, maxing out the wattage. And while the fan might be a bit loud, the game volume usually overpowers that noise, so you're pretty much in a nice sweet spot when you're plugged in. But of course, if you're not plugged in, it's not the end of the world. It can still output a decent chunk of performance. It's flexible in a way most consoles and even gaming laptops aren't, but I think that is something that comes with the gaming PC handheld experience. So it's not exactly a Rogue Ally thing, but it's definitely a plus at the end of the day. But as good as those aspects are, I don't think that's the real magic of this device. It's not just what it runs, it's where and how it lets me play. Before the Ally, I was kind of locked into one spot. If I wanted to play a proper PC game, I had to be at my desk, boot up my rig, deal with any updates, and in some cases would have to check monitor temps or deal with various issues, and it would all be locked down to my desk, so it did feel a bit like an office job. But sometimes, of course, that's fine, but life can get busy, and I don't always want to commit to full gamer or PC mode. Sometimes I just want to lean back on the couch or chill in bed and fire something up quickly, and definitely not be locked to a TV screen in the other scenario where I could be on the sofa playing a console game. But then sometimes you just want to have something in the background playing, like a show, and then have something in your lap to play, and the Ally bridges that gap. I can be halfway through Hades 2, close the lid to take a break, and then pick it up again in the kitchen while something's in the oven, and it all just feels so seamless. I'm not having to grab a controller to a bigger console and have to sit somewhere to play it, or even stand at the TV, or whatever scenario you can think of to have to sit at a docked location of a video game system, and instead it's just in the palm of my hand for seamless gameplay. I've taken it on road trips to friends' houses and even played it in bed while fighting insomnia at 3 AM, and it just makes gaming so much more available. Like picking up a Switch, but with my actual game library instead, that ranges all the games from Steam, Epic, Xbox Game Pass, and even emulators. Everything is right here on this single device, and it's made me play more and even finish more games, as it is pretty wild, because I was falling into that trap, that specific gamer trap of starting a million games and finishing none of them. But the Ally makes it easier to chip away at longer games in small bursts, and this was actually the reason that I finally beat The Witcher 3, which I'd been meaning to finish for like 5 years at this point, and the Rogue Ally allowed me to actually play the game in small bursts and not have to worry about going to a desk or the sofa and booting it up on a console or my PC, and that alone makes it worth it for me. And then let's not forget about the versatility of a gaming handheld. While I don't actually use this feature, as I do have a gaming PC that I can play on if I'm looking for that docked experience, you can plug this into a USB-C hub and make it act like a mini console or even a mini PC if you do have any uni work or any other like documentation you need to go through, or just watching YouTube. Whatever you would expect to do on a computer, you can do on this because it is running on Windows 11. You can simply just plug it into a monitor, maybe even plug in a controller, and then suddenly you've got a compact little gaming setup or a little baby gaming PC that basically takes up no space because it's such a nice and small device, and it's amazing especially for small apartments and travel. I have used it in terms of its connecting to a screen functionality in a hotel room when I've been traveling for work, so it has been really useful in regards to that. Of course, you are technically still at a desk at that point unless you have a controller, but it is able to do a lot assuming you've got the right hardware to add on to the device to make it meet your needs. And then of course, as I mentioned before, with the emulators, there is the emulation aspect of this device, and of course I'm not going to get too deep into the legality of this, But the Ally is hands down the best emulation machine I've used. It runs PS2, GameCube, DS games, PSP, and all of the other various emulators you can think of fairly well. Of course, as you go to the more 3D side of emulation, it can start to take a hit, but if you are going for that more retro style of emulation, then this can pretty much run everything you can think of. It's like having every console I've ever grown up with in a single device, and somehow it doesn't feel like a compromise, and that absolutely blows my mind. But as I mentioned earlier in the video, there is one thing that this device doesn't do so well, and I'll be honest, it's not very good at all in terms of what this aspect is, and that is battery life. This is easily the biggest trade-off for this device, as if you are running a demanding game at full power, you're going to be lucky if you even get more than 60 minutes on this device, and that's just the reality of pushing this kind of performance in a portable form. I know the Steam Deck does draw back with its performance capabilities to allow for better battery life, which many will show as one of the best aspects of the Steam Deck and why it is better than a lot of the other handheld gaming PCs, but in my opinion, this was something that I was able to adjust to fairly easily, and if I still had to choose again as to what I would go for, if it was the Rogue Ally or the Steam Deck, I would still go with the Rogue Ally solely based on its performance capabilities and the price point. If you do carry around a power bank, it pretty much neutralizes the issue of having bad battery life, and if you play plugged in a lot of the time, once again it absolutely just neutralizes this major issue. For me personally, I do use it plugged in quite a lot. Even on the train I will have it plugged in, because luckily the trains I take across England have power plug sockets, so I can just plug it in and not have to worry about battery life at all, and push out as much performance as the device is capable of. So of course, definitely keep this in mind if you do end up choosing this device or consider it. Battery life is going to be a big issue depending on how you like to play your games. And then the other little issue that you may think is a problem is the fact that it does run on Windows 11 as its primary operating system, but you are able to run Steam OS on the Rogue Ally instead of Windows if you are looking for that more gamer experience. And Steam has made it fairly official in terms of how you can get it on the system, and there's a lot of guides out there, so if you are looking to transform this into a Steam Deck of sorts, except still get that performance, then you can easily do that with many guides on the internet, so it's not too big of an issue. But if you do stick with Windows 11, of course here and there you might get the occasional updates that might halt your gaming session, or some weird pop-ups every now and again, which tend to happen at the worst time usually. But of course, if you are fairly good with computers to some extent, they're not too big of an issue, and nowadays we have ChatGPT and the rich knowledge base called the internet, so you can usually find the solution to most of your issues if they ever pop up, but fingers crossed you don't run into that scenario. And then of course the final thing that you should be aware of, which I definitely did notice while playing over the past 6 months, is that it does tend to get fairly warm. Not dangerously so, but definitely noticeable. And that said, the fan noise is surprisingly tolerable, even though it does get fairly warm, but of course the fan noise is able to keep it from getting too hot, so it does the job, and Asus clearly has put in some work for the thermals, which is nice to see. So here we are 6 months later, and not only is the Rogue Ally still in daily use for me, I'd argue it's become my primary gaming device, which is definitely something I did not expect to be the case. I thought this would be a cool toy, maybe something I'd use occasionally when traveling, as I do have to take the train fairly often for work, but instead it's become the way I play most games most of the time. Of course, there are certain games where I'll still go back to my gaming PC, like Valorant, so any competitive shooters I'll definitely always play on my actual gaming laptop, which I have docked to a few monitors. But in terms of other games, especially single player games, the Rogue Ally is my go-to machine. And what makes it special isn't just the raw power or flashy screen, though those do help. It's the way it quietly integrated into my routine, and it lets me play how and when I want, and it's reminded me that gaming doesn't have to be a chore or a scheduled activity, and it can be spontaneous again, where it just feels like back in the day when I had my Game Boy, or the DS, where I was able to just pick it up and play wherever I wanted to, and it was easy to carry around. And this just feels like a super high performance powered version of those old school consoles. And in a world where everything feels over engineered and unnecessarily complicated, the Rogue Ally just works to a T. It delivers what it promises and makes gaming feel exciting in a way that I actually haven't felt in a very long time, which was absolutely lovely to see. So yeah, this little device, or slightly big little device, it's definitely earned a permanent spot in my life and in my travel backpack, and in 6 months it's not just impressed me, it's genuinely one of the best devices in terms of handhelds I've used to date, and I can only see it ever being replaced by whatever its successor is, assuming Asus are able to top it without flopping. And with that said, that does bring us to the end of this video. Definitely drop your thoughts down below as to what you think of the Rogue Ally, and if you own one or one of the other gaming handheld PCs. And I look forward to seeing how the opinions differ in the comment section. Of course, do please keep it civil, as it's always nice to go back and forth with other gamers as to what they love about machines or what they might not like, as of course it's always healthy to give your feedback as to what is wrong with machines, so we can expose where these companies need to develop further. But I do look forward to reading how the discussion continues. As always, a like would be extremely appreciated if you did enjoy the video. It does help out the channel a ton, and be sure to subscribe for a lot more tech content. Don't forget to join our Discord, link is at the top of the description. Thank you all so much for watching. I've been Ams with Tech2, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.